When it comes to who the GOAT is in basketball, the names you'll probably hear are Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and, depending on who you ask, LeBron James. All three are great players in their own right and deserve to be in that conversation. However, there's one name that could have been up there with the best of them, and that's Len Bias. Now you're probably thinking, who the hell is that? And that's alright. Modern NBA fans probably do not know who Len Bias is, so in this video we are going to be talking about the man who was widely regarded as being better than Michael Jordan. For more content on NBA, like this video, subscribe, and click that bell icon on your right just below the video. Before we jump into the unfortunate circumstance that made Len Bias not play for the NBA, let's look at his profile and what exactly he did that made him be compared to someone like Michael Jordan. Len Bias was a 6'8" power forward who played for 4 years for the University of Maryland. Len Bias was, by all ramifications, the best player of his time, even though he was the number 2 pick when he declared for the NBA draft. He was a 2-time ACC Player of the Year, and he often had heated battles with Michael Jordan in college basketball. During their battles, they both fought as equals, and he was the only one who pushed Jordan to his limits. Like Michael Jordan, Len Bias was unstoppable on the court. He was a great athlete, but most importantly, he had that fire in his gut that drove him to want to be better than anyone else on the court. Like Jordan, he was very creative with the ball, inventing new ways to score that had not been seen before. He was a powerful athlete with a vertical leap of more than 40 inches. He combined his thunderous power with the finesse to score whenever and however he needed to. His jump shot, which was his signature move, saw him rise straight up, hovering above the outstretched hands of helpless defenders before putting the ball straight into the basket. It was nearly impossible to stop, and he was a nightmare to defenders because he had the range to back it up. He was the dream player for most NBA teams at that time. In fact, he was more in demand than Michael Jordan. To put it simply, Bias was a lean, mean scoring and rebounding machine, and they don't make NBA players like him anymore. Now, for all his obvious talents, Len Bias's first year was nothing spectacular. He started just 13 out of 30 games with a season-high performance of 18 points and a game average of 7.2 points and 4.2 rebounds. Now, make no mistake, this wasn't bad, but it wasn't great for a freshman either. But that's where we start to see the amazing drive that pushed Len Bias. He knew he had the talent to be the best, and after a disappointing first year, he knew he had to work hard to fulfill his potential. And work hard he did. In the offseason, Len Bias became a gym rat and worked on getting his body to perform better. From strength training for his muscles to ballet training for his balance, Lee Bias did it all. He even dribbled blindfolded at times to increase his handling. All of this would end up paying off immensely because the lanky boy who hit the gym in the offseason would come out with a well-toned body of a man and the skills to back his build. His sophomore year was way better than his first year, with Bias averaging 15.3 points per game on 56.7% field goal shooting. Even in defeat, Bias was arguably the most electrifying star on the court in a highly anticipated January matchup against Michael Jordan and the number 1 ranked North Carolina, which ESPN re-aired over the weekend. Now later, he was named ACC Tournament MVP as Maryland won the conference championship. At this point, Len Bias had become a monster on the court, an absolutely unstoppable athlete. He was faster than everyone, more explosive, and he could leap 2 feet into the air. He could go around defenders, dunk over them, or simply power past them with a burst of explosiveness. And as if that wasn't scary enough, Bias was also one of the best defenders in the league, and you would see him guarding players way taller than him and doing it effectively. As a senior, Bias averaged 23.2 points between 85 and 86. Now, most of that time he was getting double-teamed and triple-teamed, but that did not stop him from performing well. He was a unanimous first-team All-American and a 2-time ACC Player of the Year. With Branch gone, Maryland had little scoring depth. Point guard Keith Gatlin's 10.2 points per game were second on the team, and the Terps started 0-6 in the ACC. But Bias led his team to a 19-14 record, 6-8 ACC, and a number 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. His best games of the season came when he scored a career-high 41 points on January 25, 1986. And even though Maryland did lose, Bias shone so much that the opposition coach said Bias was the best visiting player he has ever watched. Afterward, Bias declared for the NBA draft and looked to have one of the best careers ever. Now, Len Bias was sought after by all the top teams in the NBA at that time, but as the draft got closer, everyone knew where Bias would end up: the Boston Celtics. The Celtics had been keeping tabs on Len Bias since his sophomore year, with team president Red Auerbach inviting Bias to his basketball camp the summer before the draft and attending as many Maryland games as he could that winter. The Celtics even went as far as spreading rumors to ensure Cleveland did not pick Bias. Since they had the overall second pick in the draft, which they had traded for 2 years prior, and with Cleveland drafting Brad Dowry, which by the way was a sensational pick, the Celtics had a clean shot at Len Bias. With the Celtics having won 67 games and an NBA title the previous season, everyone expected them to become unbeatable with Bias joining. But then, in just 48 hours, tragedy struck, and all those dreams came crashing down. Being one of the best players of your generation comes with a lot of pressure, and Bias was feeling it. Everyone knew he would be in the top 3 pick, with some people claiming he'd be the number 1 pick. Bias did not know how to deal with that pressure correctly, so he did what every college kid does when they're under pressure: go partying and get high. Unfortunately, this would be the very thing that cut Len Bias's life abruptly short. On June 17th, the afternoon of the draft, Bias was in New York, hale and hearty and ready to just take on the world. When his name was called on stage, he stepped up, flashed a brilliant smile at the cameras, and turned on the charm for the series of interviews that came next. For people watching him that day, they all thought that was the beginning of what would be a great rivalry between Len Bias and Michael Jordan. Little did they know that that was the last time they would see him alive. A day after the draft, Bias and his father traveled to Boston to begin negotiations with the Celtics, and they also started a negotiation with Reebok for a $3 million deal. Now that may not seem like a lot of money, but at the time, it would have been one of the biggest sporting deals ever signed. At the end of the negotiations, Len Bias flew home and drove to campus to celebrate with friends, and the only way he knew how to: by partying hard. After the party, Len Bias and his friends went back to their suite where they had a couple of drinks and then snorted cocaine. The cocaine was either too strong or impure, but whatever the case may be, it led to Len Bias having a series of heart attacks in his sleep before he passed on. By morning, when his friends woke up, they called 911 and notified his family, but by then the damage was already done. Paramedics tried to revive him, but by 8:31 on June 19th, Len Bias was declared dead by doctors in the hospital he was taken to. And that is the story of the greatest NBA player that never was. If Len Bias had lived, he probably would have stopped Michael Jordan from winning 6 titles, and we might be having a very different conversation about who the greatest of all time is. Now he's just the poster child for what if. And this brings us to the end of this video, so please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us what you think would have happened if Len Bias did not die. Till next time, stay safe, and remember kids, don't do drugs.